All right, so hi everyone and welcome to this webinar hosted by the Chaco Culture Conservancy. I am Olivia Thompson, the Executive Director of the Conservancy. For those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, we are a 501c3 charitable organization and philanthropic partner to Chaco Culture National Historical Park and Aztec Ruins National Monument. Our mission is to inspire people to support, connect with, and learn about Aztec Ruins National Monument and Chaco Culture National Historical Park through philanthropy and volunteer activities, thus ensuring the preservation of the Chacoan architectural landscapes, natural resources, and cultural heritage for present and future generations. With help from our generous donors, the Conservancy funds projects around both parks that, without our help, may go unfunded. We primarily support trails projects, preservation of sites, and museum and archival work. In fact, the board of directors is currently reviewing a project proposal list for 2024 that includes over $100,000 worth of projects that need funding. Today, a donation today will help to ensure that this important work can be accomplished around the parks. These parks and the natural and cultural places and spaces that they encompass are important, sacred, and irreplaceable. The work that we do, the work that our donors enable us to do, provides crucial support to the National Park Service in their mission to preserve these landscapes. If you are interested in supporting our organization by making a donation today, I have put a link in the chat that will take you to our donation page. If you're watching this later in time, that link will be in the description of this video. Other ways to support us include signing up for the newsletter, which you can also do on our website, and following us on social media. We are Chaco Culture Conservancy on Facebook and at Chaco Conservancy on Instagram. As always, the CCC thanks you for your support of our organization and of these incredibly important public lands. And thank you for joining us today for this very special webinar. Before we get started, I want to ask all participants to keep yourselves muted for the duration of the webinar. We will have time for a Q&A after Venaya's talk, so if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. And to do that, you can click on the button at the bottom of your screen that says chat, and the chat box will pop up for you. So now I'm thrilled to introduce you all to Venaya Yazzie, who in celebration of Women's History Month will be speaking about the historical and cultural narratives of the high desert matriarchy in the Four Corners Southwest region. Venaya, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insight with us today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
Is that working?
I'm seeing a Zoom inception somehow. So I think you've shared your whole screen instead of the PowerPoint screen. There we go. And then if you just want to make it bigger. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Olivia, and to all the entities that you just addressed. I appreciate being here today and sharing a part of my culture here in the Four Corners High Desert Southwest. And I'm grateful for, this day that is cloudy in our community and the hope of maybe rain. And that's always a blessing. And I want to introduce myself before I get started in my native language, which is the Dene language. And I am Venaya Yazzie, Yanishya, Hawanthana Nishle, Twadich Ini Bashishchin, Toeheglini Ada Shache, Ado Kisani Ada Shanele. And I am from the Farmington community right now, but my homelands are here in the Northwest New Mexico area, in the area that's called Huerfano Peak community, and also my maternal grandfather was from the Quimbato area, which is near the Chaco Canyon site up there on the mesa. So today I'm going to share with you the narrative, the oral histories, and the artistic visions of women within my community in which I dwell. As you're As you might know, we are a part of the Four Corners community, which is called by the global community, which refers to the place where the four states meet that are Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. And I dwell within the northwest region of New Mexico and the United States. The title of my program today is Women of Water, Navajo and Pueblo Women's Identities and Cultural Landscapes. Thank you for being here. As I mentioned, I said Yazzie in the beginning, which is a greeting in my native language, and it's having to do with how we exist here as Navajo people. We refer to ourselves as the five-finger earth dwellers, and that reference of Yazzie is referencing how we exist as human beings between the earth and the sky. So it's really a greeting of placement of us as the human identity within this place in which we live. And it don't literally mean hello, which a lot of people say translates to hello, but it doesn't. So a lot of the imagery that I'm going to share with you today is my own images that I take my photographs with on my travels, or else they're references to historical photographs in the archives, and also images of my own artwork. So I'm going to, one of the first things that I'm really interested in is a narrative and creative writing, but also the narrative of women. And I've always been a visual person. I've always been an artist in that way. And I think as an adult, as a mature person, I've come more into aspects of sharing writings. Most of my ancestors' use of oral histories came through narration of the voice, and until recently, we have had a lot of more native poets who have really come into play and began telling stories as we did when we were, without technology back in the day. So there's several poems that I have done where I'm referencing water, and I'm just going to do an excerpt from a poem that I wrote about water entitled "She is Water." She speaks with a green sage tongue where female words sparkle like water, like shimmering summer storm clouds, like the shimmering eyes of brown grandmothers. A couple years back, I did a project where I made garments, and I titled it Women of Water Ba, which was in reference to how we as women in the high desert Southwest exist in places where there's water. We're very blessed in this community to have many water tributaries coming through our community. For me, the closest water tributary is the Animas River, which comes out of southwest Colorado. And then we have now the San Juan River, which is coming from the Navajo Dam. And then if you go further down south, we have the Rio Grande River. And we have all these small little tributaries that run into communities of people. So rivers and this area play a big part of who we are, what our identity is in reference to our prayers, our ceremonies, and our celebrations of life. And this all began in 2015 as I began my research into how water is really an important aspect of our Indigenous life here. And the Gold King mine spill happened on August 4th, 2015. And that really woke me up to how vital our rivers are in their pristine condition. What happened was the EPA accidentally opened a gold mine up in Colorado, and all the toxic chemicals that were left there spilled out and ran all the way through our river system here. and pretty much into the Gulf of Mexico. First thing I wanted to do was also to recognize that March is International Women's Month, and I'm doing this as a part of paying respect to all the past matriarchs who have gone through our communities and shared their stories and lived their lives throughout our community. And then I also wanted to just recognize that March 22nd was World Water Day, and the United Nations had designated water as a human resource and recognition that clean water is essential to human life and our human right. And I think we as Native people and all people of the world understand how important water is. So when I speak of women of the Dene, Navajo people, Pueblo, and Hopi people, I'm really speaking about how we are a society of the matrilineal culture. As a person of that descent and being a part of that community, my biological identity as a human being is established through the female line of births from a human woman, and she may have a male or a female baby, and that child is always going to be identified through her family kinship line, or as we know it now, their clan group. And so kinship is established through a mother's clan, and that's forever until that child leaves. So that's one thing I wanted to state before we go on. That way you get an understanding of who we are as people here in this community. So I'm going to kind of go between speaking in the Pueblo world and the Navajo world, but more so of the Navajo, because again, I'm born from a Navajo mother, therefore my identity is a Navajo woman, although I had a Hopi heritage from my father's side. So when we talk about a matrilineal society and then also a matriarchal society, there's differences in those two addresses. So through the matrilineal society I just mentioned, if you're born through a mother who is a female, you are automatically part of her clan kinship system, and that's the biological identity. Now, traditionally, the Navajos were also a matriarchal society, which meant we were governed through our leadership through the women. But as colonization came into our community of Navajo people, and we slowly adopted governance from the Euro-American governance in Washington, D.C., our matriarchal society has been slightly changing from year to year, and now more than ever, our government is governed through strictly male, although there are women counterparts within our Navajo Nation Council. When I speak about established identity or identities, it really is rooted in what is called epistemologies or indigenous epistemologies, or ways of knowing. That's our belief systems. And so within the Southwest, we have the Navajo tribal people here in New Mexico, and then also the many Rio Grande Pueblos that are established up in near Santa Fe and Taos and down through Albuquerque with Isleta, and then across the interstate in Acoma and Laguna. And then you have Zuni Pueblo and then Hopi people in Arizona. So it's important to establish that, all these tribal peoples that I mentioned all have an identity from their own belief and ways of perpetuating their own epistemologies, which in turn creates their identity. So I have here inherited land identity. So with the Navajo system beliefs, we're taught as Navajo people that we are born from this organic world of water. When a woman gives birth, the first thing that happens in that state is that her water breaks. You always hear that. And so before the child comes into this space, this tangible world, they live in this world of water. And so many times when Navajo children are taught about where they came from, a lot of times they're taught that we came from water. And so when we came here, before we left our mother's womb, we were water. And then when we got into this earth, we took our first breath and we became human beings. But we will always remember that first identity we had as water beings, if you might say. And so in Navajo, we have a term that we call Tuaeina, which means water is life. Um, so with Navajo and Pueblo, there are very many similarities and so many parallels that exist in our epistemologies, but there are distinct differences. But the one thing I think that stays true all the time is that, our women really understand that inherited existence of land and water within our own lifetimes. And it's almost like we have this genetic memory embedded deep, deep in our DNA where we understand that we do have connections to the land and we do have connections to the water. So one of those things when we connect to the land is the use of turquoise in our artwork and also in our spiritual life. And it's also a symbolic gesture of water because of the color blue. In our Navajo culture, in our language, we don't call it turquoise. We refer to it just as the color blue, and that word is dog ije. So whenever I see an elder or, I wear turquoise, it's always referred to as, having that dog ije on you, that blue. It's mostly reference to water, but it also could be reference to the sky. So water is important in that spiritual aspect, and it's also very important in our because what I'm telling you is a lot of oral histories about how we think about water symbolically. But a lot of times I think as modern native people we kind of get stuck in saying, oh, long time ago our elders said and our elders did, but sometimes we don't really reference that. Those kind of thoughts and narratives and dialogue are still present in our modern lives. I wanted to reference this quote from the Pueblo Alliance, um, which is headquartered near what is present day Santa Fe over in the Tewa lands. And they had to say this about kinship with water. And it goes, within Pueblo perspectives, our rivers, roles are viewed as mothers, and women are keepers of water. Waterways are spiritually governed by our mothers and have provided sustenance for what grows on the lands. And I really felt that because a lot of times in the Pueblo culture, the women are the keepers of the water. I recently was able to view a modern artist who is Pueblo. Her name is Shireen Pilar Gonzalez, and she's Tiwa. And she made a short film titled Riverbank Pokege, which is a short film about water and how water plays a healing element within modern Pueblo culture. Because within our native nations, we still have a lot of social ills that are plaguing our people. It's not just this happy romanticized version of Native Americans. We do have these social ills that we come against every day and try to remedy. And so in this particular movie, this particular film, the lead character is going back to the water, the Rio Grande, in her community, and she's finding that sustenance, that healing that she needs for herself mentally, spiritually, and physically. So the protagonist in this short film is a woman, and I would really recommend that you all check out that movie because it really gives a really well-rounded modern idea of what actually is happening in our public communities and how they're turning back to water as a way of bringing back that harmony or that balance in their lives. Now, I wanted to go getting into the water in place. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about cultural landscape. Cultural landscape is very important in our own epistemologies because we have these tangible places within our own little communities, our own little villages where we may have a sacred so-called spots that are highly energetic and are places of reverence within our people's vision. So for me in this area, I would say that the river is one of my major cultural landscapes that I reference to and go to all the time because many things have happened here at the river through history, and things are still happening now within the history, and people are still turning to the river for life. So this area, for those of you who aren't familiar, our region and our land, like again, as I said, is in northwest New Mexico and also north central New Mexico. And in this area particularly, we have the areas of Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and other Puebloan sites. And then if you go further south and central, you have the Rio Grande Pueblos. And there are several of them. And then when I talk about Navajo land, in my own experience, we refer to that as Eastern Navajo Nation because we're located on the very eastern side of the Greater Navajo Nation, which is located mostly in Arizona. But we also have Navajos that live in Utah. The region of landscape here is referenced as the high desert. So there's a lot of sandstone mesas, canyons, large arroyos, places where water filters down when it rains. And then a lot of our cultural sites here are referenced to waters. One example of that is in my own Navajo clan system. We are identified by certain clans. For my clan, I am Many Hogan's clan from my mother. And then from my father, it is Bitterwater people. So that's a reference to water. So a lot of the Navajo clans have references of water in them. Water in place, back to cultural landscape. For the Pueblo homelands in the areas, like I mentioned before, the Rio Grande Pueblos, they call the places that is their homelands the White Shell Water Place. And then in Navajo, we call it the place of water, or we say Tutja, which means that water place. So, one of the things that I thought I'd approach this topic with, as far as looking at our identities as Native people here in the community, is to really look at how the Navajo and Pueblo women's culture, especially in the art culture and the creative culture, has really maintained this idea of our identity of Indigenous people here in the Southwest and then female people living here in the Southwest. And a lot of how we express our reverence for water, the land, the sky is through our arts. So a lot of times throughout our history, we always made utilitarian products. They were designed by women and they were made by women. And then in the end, they were artistically created with our own visions of interpretation of the land, sky, and water. So within our pots and then with our woven blankets, we would apply paints to adorn those items that we made, which will be used to be carrying water or keeping ourselves warm. In some cultures, though, pots are not decorated, but a lot of Southwest, especially Pueblo pots, are highly decorated. So one example of Navajo women's art that really is referencing or was inspired by the land, the water, and the clouds was the Navajo's early women's woven blanket. So before Navajo women weavers were influenced by the Anglo-American traders that came into our communities and started dealing in our blankets, we were making these kind of rugs. They were just banded rugs. They were usually made with traditional colored wool, which was the white, gray wool from churro sheep, and then the black and the gray colored churro sheep. And we would just do these banded blankets of black and white or indigo. Sometimes we would dye them. And then sometimes we'd use the red fabric from the wool blankets that were used in the military men's uniforms. Women would take them apart and use those. But what these blankets were doing was they were referencing the land, the sky, and the water. So if you really look at a woman's blanket as the one pictured here, it's really an abstract idea of what women at that time were symbolizing as water, air, clouds, sky. And I love this quote from a young Navajo weaver, and she was so inspired by this blanket that I seen this and I wanted to reference it. She said, "I see a rebelliousness to this, avoiding the usual color contrasts. People claim that we wove for purely economic reasons, but if that were true, then weavers would have cranked blankets out instead of making these aesthetic choices by placing the black next to the blue. A choice is implied. They wanted to make art and they did care about what they were making. Knowing this makes the object seem more than human to me." And I've always loved the first phase women's blankets of the Navajo people. Now, going into Navajo Pueblo women's art, we're going to see a lot of Pueblo pottery items, which again were utilitarian nature because they carried water. And now Pueblo women make them as a way of paying homage to their ancestors. But this particular pot and the following images are from the Grounded in Clay exhibition that is a traveling exhibition now out of the School of Advanced Research in Santa Fe, where each artist chose an ancestral pot to talk about and sort of pay respects to. This is a pot here made by Carrie Chino Charlie of Acoma, and it's a water jar from about 1985. And her granddaughter is commenting on this and saying how she put, it's often forgotten that we merely borrow these elements from Mother Earth. In the same way, we are all only borrowed time. I feel my grandmother's presence when I hold this jar that she created years ago. The pottery is still infused with her energy. And that's one of the things I wanted to really talk about is how women's art, although utilitarian at some point in time, was really made from our aesthetic, our inspiration from the land, the water, and the sky. Here's another pot from, this is a pot from Tasuki. It's called a Tasuki water jar. And she's also talking about this pot and how, you know, it's a jar, a water jar made for traveling, and it really brings out what this potter was thinking about when they made it, and it was their creativeness that they wanted to do this pot, but also to carry water. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Zuni Ola maidens, but at Zuni Pueblo, there's a distinct group of Native women, generation, who do displays of their. You can see this photo here with the pots on their head, and traditionally, what they would do is they would go down to the water place and gather water in these pots, and they would put them on their head and to bring them back to their village. And nowadays they more likely just do those things to pay respects to their traditions. But the Zuni Ola maidens are one of the women groups in our community that really had paid a lot of reverence to water. So for the Zuni Ola Pueblo maidens, their identity as being these water carriers is still instilled into their traditional culture and now into 2024. If you ever get a chance to see them, it's amazing to watch them dance. So here's an example of a Zuni water jar or a pot. And a lot of times the artwork on there is in reverence to all those elemental aspects I talked about earlier: water, air, and earth, clouds. And then when you go into the women's wear, what women were wearing and still wearing in the Pueblo culture, a lot of the references in the geometric designs are all references to clouds, rain, rainfall, abundance of the female nourishment of the land. And I wanted to show you this photograph here. It's a photo of an original piece of art made by Fred Caboti, and it's called Hopi Women Carrying Water Vessels, and it's from 1921. But here, although he's a male artist, he's depicting what his culture of women were wearing and how they would carry the water in their communities. So really breaking this all down and just giving you all that visual is just to show you that within the Navajo and Pueblo cultural societies here in the community of Southwest, where water is very much a powerful aspect of our arid, dry climate, that we see water as female, we see the land as female, and we see both those things, especially water, as caretaker of our communities. Because without water, nothing would grow, and we would have no food, and we would not get nourished. In that same aspect, the land. Here I have a photograph of a Pueblo woman's garment, manta, and it's depicting the clouds in this one. So, you know, women plus water equals our narrative of our identity and our identities. It's very important that, you know, we look at those aspects of our culture to really understand who we are now as modern Navajo people that are women, and modern Pueblo people that are women. Today, we still carry aspects of the arts culture within our communities, and a lot of times the women's culture of artistry is taught from matriarch to her daughter. So I will speak mostly with the Navajos in mind is that, you know, my own grandmother, the late Jane Warito Yazzie, was taught weaving by her mother, which was my great grandmother, and her name was Louise Bijiba Begay Warito. And so it kept going and passed down through the years. I weave, but I'm not an avid weaver. My area of art expression is through painting, two-dimensional arts, photography, and poetry. But I feel like in some ways, even doing those different medias, it always references back to rugs and rug designs and using symbology of my own family's line to put into my artwork. So all in all, you know, when you look at how we as women of the Southwest identify ourselves with water, it's in all aspects. It's in how we understand how we came to be humans on this earth, but then we also look at it and how we do our daily tasks of utilitarian work, caring for our families, caring for our livestock, caring for our art, and then perpetuating art in that same way. So there's really no line that's drawn to where we can say I'm only an artist, I'm only a teacher, I'm only, you know, a mother, I'm only you know, I don't know, whatever profession they're in. You know, we always know that those two things intermingle within each other, and that's kind of how our societies work in a matriarchy and within our matrilineal societies. So I wanted to say Ahiaha and Asquali. I can take questions now, and if you're interested in looking at some of my work, you can reference these places. I do a blog where I talk about issues on what I talked to you about today, and then also my artwork. So Olivia, I think I'm not sure how long I have left, but I could do questions or I could keep going if you have any more need for me to keep talking.
Thank you so much, Venaya. Um, stop the screen sharing. Thank you so much. What a beautiful talk that was. Absolutely. We have a few more minutes. If you would like to continue to talk, feel free. As I mentioned at the beginning, for our participants, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box. So you'll just click on the little chat icon that pops up at the bottom of your screen. In the meantime, I have a quick question for you. So when people visit places like Chaco Canyon and Aztec ruins, and other sites that are in this, as you mentioned, very arid area, it's hard, I think, for a lot of people to imagine how water was abundant in the past. Obviously, now we have flowing water because we're in the modern society, and so it can be really hard for people to imagine what abundant water looks like and what can be a very arid environment. So I just wondered if you had any insight on into how necessary water was in the past as well, not just to survival, but in every aspect, as you mentioned, of life.
Yeah, so we always talk about, you know, the past and really talk about the tangible culture, especially as Indigenous people. We talk about all the ways that were passed down through our matriarchs and our patriarchs. But when you look at the land, specifically the landscape and the climate that we lived in back, you know, maybe 4 generations from here back, um, you know, science tells us that, you know, water was more abundant and that we weren't in such a climate of crisis. Although this is the high desert, you know, one of the things that I think our ancestor did was they understood how they were going to survive. So they would have to put up their homes near water sources, you know. And so here in this community, we're blessed to have the Hesperus Mountains, the San Juan Mountains over near Durango, Colorado, who are still getting snow right now. And when the spring comes, they start melting. The snow starts melting, and then it makes its way down to south here and feeds into the Animas River, and then now the Navajo Dam, which feeds into the San Juan River. The San Juan River, of course, didn't exist back then, but so even the Navajo people, the Apache people, the Ute people who are also part of this community, and the Pueblo people, they were building their homes near these water tributaries because they understood that they had to have that water source in order to survive. And so I think for myself, when I think about my own family's oral histories of water in this community here, like my grandmother would always talk about how they would come down here from Orfano community area, and they would drop down into the San Juan Valley, and they would camp here in this place called Tuatara, now what is present day Farmington, New Mexico. And they would have other tribal groups too that would also come here during the springtime and the summertime, and they would plant their crops here, and they would gather water and do all these sort of religious festivals or just celebrations of life during the time. And so I think just having to travel to get to water really gave us a huge reverence for water. And so now we understand that, as ancestors of our family, we understand how important water is and how that's an important part of our identity now. And like I mentioned before, with the Navajo people, a lot of our clan names have water in them. Like, for example, I mentioned that the Navajos have, like, mine is Bitterwater, Tuatara. There's so many water terms within the Navajo culture of clan names, but that would be one example. And I know the Pueblos also do too, but I can't really speak on a lot of the distinct names. But that would probably be my answer to your question, is just the kinship to it, and we understood that.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I don't think that we have any other questions. So unless you have any thoughts that you'd like to leave us with, oh, we do have a question. Anne has asked, how or when did the San Juan River come to be? Do you know?
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Anne, for that question. So, in about, I think I remember that was within the 60s, that the 50s and the 60s when the San Juan River came to be, because there was a need for water at that time because cities were being built down south. And so that whole area, what is called now Navajo Dam, or the Gobernador area, there's a lot of Puebloan sites and Navajo sites up there too, Puebloan sites in like Francis Canyon and all that area near Navajo Dam. But they built that dam during that time because they needed water. So 50s and 60s. But one interesting thing about that is, many people don't know, is that inside that Navajo Dam, which was a canyon, right, before there was water in it, there was a lot of sacred Navajo sites in there. So there was a lot of petroglyphs and pictographs within that area that were done by Navajo people. And then there was actual places where Navajos would go to do their religious activities within that. So when they dammed that with the water, all those sites were gone forever, I guess. So I think that's one of the reasons why not all Navajos, but a lot of Navajos don't go there, because they think of it as kind of being like almost like a graveyard site, so they don't go in those waters.
Great, thank you. Alyssa has her hand raised. Let me see if I can.
You
Ooh.
did it.
Oh, there we go.
Hi, Ate Sade.
Hello.
Hello. My question was, what inspired Matriarch Land?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Alyssa. So, as a visual artist, I mentioned before, and as a writer, as a poet, I came up with this concept called Matriarch Land, because I wanted to pay respects to the stories and the narrative of my women in my family, extended family, my clan kinship family, because when you really look down at how land is governed and resources in Navajo communities, it's always through the women's line. And so a lot of times I felt like wherever we roamed here within this area, this community, it was all land that was and still belongs to the women, the matriarchs of our land. And so, and then when you look symbolically at how a lot of indigenous nations look at the land, it's female, right? We've heard of Mother Earth. In Navajo, we call Nahasani reverence to this land we live on. And so that's just kind of how I came in with the idea of a matriarch land. Yeah. Thank you.
I was talking and I was muted. I think we're coming to the end of our time. So I just want to say thank you so much again to our participants and our speaker. And for those of you who are watching in the future, thank you so much for reviewing the recording. And we hope that you will visit us again for more webinars in the future. The Chaco Culture Conservancy has several events coming up, several more webinars this year planned, several tours planned as well. So please make sure to keep an eye on our website and our social medias. And we hope to see you soon. And thank you again so much. And I will stop recording.